There we go. Hey, folks, great to have you on board with us. I'm very, very excited to have Dave King with us here, the CEO and founder of Move 37 and numerous other companies, including the Royals. We'll get him to explain that in a little bit. Super excited. It's a year ago since we had a chat. And Dave, welcome aboard.
Great to be here, Gary. Good to see you again.
I'm super excited to we worked out APAC's AI before we press record.
Just for now.
Good, folks, 100%. Because a year ago when we were talking, I reckon, as it turned out, Dave knew what was about to happen throughout 2024 with AI, having played in the space way back since the 1990s, as you heard in the intro, folks. But I certainly didn't, and I reckon a lot of you didn't. However, a year that's wound on since then, I think most folk tuning in and or getting exposed to this conversation would agree that throughout 2024, everyone's become aware and there's hardly anybody that hasn't been touched by it. So, Dave, what have been the big shifts in AI that you've seen and equally will flow into what you're doing with Move 37 now?
Yeah, I reckon since 12 months ago, I think you're right. There wasn't. I kind of talked about knowledge of AI being unevenly distributed. So, we meet a lot of clients, a lot of companies, and every time we kind of talk to someone, it's not exactly like the last time. So everyone has a kind of quite a different kind of perspective or amount of knowledge or experience, and that's still the case. But I think you're right. 12 months ago, there was a lot of people who hadn't sort of dived in, hadn't tried it, a lot of conversations. And I think during the last 12 months, we've seen lots of workplaces lean into it. And sometimes that's through kind of a bottom-up approach where employees start to be playing with stuff at work. Or sometimes it's a top-down approach where management says, we've got to get on top of this, etc. And I think the evolution of organizations or the maturity of organizations in this space for us kind of sits with individual sort of prompting, so playing with ChatGPT, Claude, Gemini, Copilot, those kind of things. But that's actually quite a solitary experience. If you think about you're using it and you're literally, you look out into an open plan office and you've got no idea who's using it. It's not a openly communicative activity. So after a while, people go, okay, what are you using it for? And sort of, sometimes that might be in a workshop and it's facilitated, or they're just talking in the kitchen and sort of sharing things that have worked or haven't worked. So what we've seen in the last year is a bunch of organisations in Australia and beyond kind of move beyond that and starting to look at I guess the top down, saying what are the processes or workflows from a more holistic perspective rather than just focus on the individual that could be augmented or automated by AI. And by augmented, I mean, we use this phrase human in the loop because it's very important to kind of understand that AI can't be, taken to court or sued for, defaming someone or whatever. So this is assisted decision making. You're not going to delegate the decision to AI is kind of the traditional way of thinking about this. But there are steps in it that you can automate as long as basically there's some kind of human oversight. And so I think looking at the workflows, whether we're working with large sort of online publisher or a legal company or a finance company, people are able to describe the workflows that they do before they even start thinking about AI. And we're getting better at kind of understanding from a bunch of different projects and experience where the opportunities are, having heard this a little bit before, to understand, how AI might help relieve some pain points, accelerate your opportunities or your growth or whatever your goals are. And then the third component, so there's individuals, team workflows. The third part is occasionally, and this is also happening more with some of your bigger companies, they go, okay, there's an opportunity for us to build something new here. This doesn't exist. And so we're going to have some new IP. And that can come from ideas that just weren't feasible yesterday. The cost of building product is drastically coming down, which is a fascinating thing we're seeing across all kinds of sectors.
And does that lead into what Move 37 is able to do in terms of its support for some of that augmentation, help drive down costs for organizations in terms of this front end services? And what might be in a specific example where companies are using this? Because I've got a couple I'll throw back at you that I'm
Yeah.
aware of.
One probably my favorite project at the moment, or I shouldn't say favorite, I love all my children equally. My favorite, most interesting project is a large organization, ASX listed organization, and internally they're a sales driven organization, so thousands of salespeople. And so, the whole organization is orientated around making them succeed, reducing friction, helping them, access all the resources they need in order to, be more effective out in the road. So one weird thing that was happening in that organization was because it's such a weight of people and kind of attention on sales as a process, they found that they were hitting up customer service internally to get help. That customer service is meant to be for external customers, but because the sales guys are so time poor, they were using those channels. So the CTO kind of reached out to us and said, "I've got an idea, and that is how about we built like an AI assistant that helped the salespeople achieve the kind of things without bugging customer service." So it was a high percentage of sort of queries that were clogging up customer service, which meant real customers couldn't sort of get through. So we're working on this assistant, and it's able to. The goal is for it to help people prepare for sales meetings. So things like, when I last spoke to this client or customer, what were the pain points, and how would they benefit from this other product? And do they have any customer service tickets I should be aware of? What were the real estate listings on the weekend that might sort of be, messing with their idea of success? All sorts of just natural language queries. So sales guys, as you know, Gary, have a lot of IP in their head from being out on the road at the coalface. If they can just translate that into talking with an assistant and getting kind of intelligent responses back, that is a massive benefit for any organization. And so that is an example for that company, but we're seeing that kind of thing, which we're kind of talking about like the democratization of insights. So all organizations have lots of insights around them, but the bigger they are and the more kind of, siloed departments and locked up information there is, the harder it is for teams to access them. So one of the things we've seen in the last year is lots of organizations kind of going, help us build like an organizational brain that understands, it doesn't just rely on what ChatGPT knows or Claude knows, it understands our data and our history and all those kind of things, but has the world view of a large language model. So the combination of your data, your IP, and the large language model's way of understanding the world and concepts within that data is a super powerful kind of combination. So we're doing a lot of work in that kind of space.
Wow. Are you calling it anything specifically like that service? Has it got a name? Like if someone rang up and say, "Hey, Dave, we're
Yeah.
tuned in on YouTube or we watched the podcast recording," um,
Can
what
we
would
have a
they?
brain? um, we have three. It's not as productized as I guess we would hope, but there's a lot of reasons for that. This is still an emergent technology. It's not a mature technology. And so over the past few years, we are constantly looking for ways to find commonalities in what we do. But because it's so new and people are coming at it from different angles, it's still quite bespoke. But basically, we have three offerings. We have masterclass, a series of masterclasses for individuals and teams. Then we have automating workflow stuff, which is kind of stringing pieces together, making things work more efficiently, that kind of stuff. And then a bespoke build, which is, the components still exist, but there's no tool on the market that's going to let you help realize the goals. So we have our AI engineers and our AI architect kind of working on that.
Yeah, sweet. So,
Yeah,
so for example, 8 months ago, I heard my first AI version of an AI answering incoming phones
yeah,
for an Australian company. And at that time, 8 months ago, there's no freaking way you would use it in the real world.
yeah,
2 weeks ago, same organization, and I heard that AI tool. And I've spent a lot of my life in customer service and
yeah,
people how to speak on phones and stuff. On all honesty, the different ways it was spoken with in the scenarios, it was 98% better than most humans would probably be.
yeah,
And it's 24/7, like doesn't get sick, keeps like that is a game changer for
yeah,
probably every business, but specifically small businesses and medium-sized businesses that have that challenge from a staffing point of view. Like,
yeah.
is that what you've sort of seen evolve?
Yeah, that's an interesting point. So, especially on the small business front, we're talking a lot with, say, organizations that have small businesses as their customers, so B2B stuff. The opportunity for AI to give these small businesses kind of superpowers, extra capability that they never would have been able to afford. So we kind of say, with the arrival of kind of AI agents, which we can talk about, you kind of get access to a fractional CMO. You could never afford to hire a CMO or a CFO, but you get access to the kind of knowledge that that kind of person and perspective and advice that that kind of person would offer. But then to be able to execute on tasks, actually do things is the next wave of stuff. But the customer service thing is interesting because I think with all these things, AI is interesting because it's not just in the workplace, but it's in society. It's at dinner parties, people are talking about it, it's in the movies, that kind of thing. So for every kind of advancement, there's obviously a kind of a feeling of this is a dystopian future that's kind of running at us without us being able to have a say in it. So there's a fair bit of cynicism and concern ethically and safety and all that kind of stuff, which is 100% warranted because we need to kind of critique these things.
Yes.
And the voice thing's interesting. I think there's two sides to every kind of AI deployment. One is the feasibility of the technology, is it capable? And the other is the human side of it is this something people want? Are people going to accept this? In
Yes.
customer service, I feel like, we did a project for Australia Post years ago, and the idea was that Australia Post had to run all its call centres in Australia for union regulatory reasons. But at Christmas time, the customer service thing would get clogged up because parcels everywhere. And so the idea was, how do we offload some of that customer service inbound traffic onto a bot? And that it was 2018, 19, so quite controversial at that stage internally to kind of go, that's not something our customers are going to accept, and that's not something our people want in their kind of workplace. But the reality was, after we did a stack of kind of listening to calls and call jacking and understanding the analytics of that kind of thing, 97% of the calls were where the F is my package. So it wasn't like they wanted a chat. It wasn't like they needed to know where their nearest post office was, or Australian Post thought, oh, we're going to have this sophisticated chatbot that's going to be able to do all these things. All they had to do was give a tracking number, and they got an answer by text about it. So it's kind of like, how can you service the right use cases in the right way? And yes, if a customer service channel is using an AI bot and voice, there's probably needs to be a way to delicately hand that off to a human if needed. But it's just people are starting to accept that they can resolve something through this mechanism, and that's what they want. They don't necessarily want to have a best friend on a customer service hotline. They just want to get their thing done. So
Yeah.
whatever works is emerging as the acceptance criteria.
Because my point in saying that the AI was 98% better than humans was the way that it demonstrated it was, and I say in inverted commas, listening,
Yeah,
because it was actually picking up the words and the word tracks that the human on the other end
absolutely.
saying, and it was responding because it had been well trained, obviously,
Yeah.
to be able to respond within its algorithms to that in such an effective way. I'm thinking most humans ain't going to be listening that closely, right?
No, it's
And
kind of like the ability to do improv. Like
yes,
some humans are good at it and some people aren't. But
yes,
just to kind of go, if it's a very linear kind of way of doing customer service or whatever it is, humans are going to be fine. But once you're asked to kind of go off track, a large language model and AI sort of implementation is probably going to be better at carving off like a diverse range of use cases than any given person.
yeah. And because it was a test, right? The person said, "Oh, will you go out on a date with me?"
Yeah, right.
So they went and asked stupid questions like that.
Yeah,
And the way it handled that was really good. Like it had been trained to handle it and say, hey, look, we don't have
it's not
relations.
what he thought. It's very interesting. So that's kind of called like, there's a lot of testing we do. It's called red teaming, and it's trying to provoke, find bugs, find failure states and situations where it's going to go off track. And this has been another thing, I guess, when thinking about the last 12 months, the maturity of these implementations and the ability to put up guardrails about the behavior in AI has allowed us to do more commercialized, sort of production ready implementations. Because literally, sort of 18 months, 2 years ago, we have a similar test. We go, who is LeBron James? And the ideal thing for any given implementation is to say exactly what you said. It's like, well, I know who LeBron James is, but we're not here to talk about that. How can I help you with your legal inquiry? And
Yes.
so that's been quite tricky because large language models have the world's knowledge baked in. And so to focus on that and go, you know, what about if, I'm asking about LeBron James because, my package is a LeBron James poster and it's been lost in the post. And so the nuance of actually getting it to understand the context is moving along quite quickly. So giving an LLM or a AI context behind the scenes, in and around those things, is kind of creating much better experiences for customers.
And I've learned in this space, and again, I'm interested in your expertise and about the energy required for AI to operate,
Mm,
run the service, for example, right? And a lot of people, we're in a world where most people are concerned about energy levels and obviously the environment and stuff like that. And yet we have pivoted to this path that it's you mentioned the word dystopia before that it looks like it's we ain't stopping.
mm,
And it's not coming, it's already here. It's just
mm.
it's gonna how much more is it going to permeate through our lives and our society? Um, what are your thoughts on how that's going to get managed over time, the energy consumption side
Yeah.
of
I
AI?
think I think about it every day, and I have like an ethical quandary about kind of working in this space. My partner is a climate change communication specialist, so we kind of have this kind of funny but not funny race in our house about what's going to destroy the planet first, AI or climate change. I think on the energy consumption, it's interesting that there's a couple of schools for thought around that. So one thing that we're seeing is that the water consumption required for cooling data centers is skyrocketing. So something like Amazon, Google, the big data centers, and they've just announced Stargate, which is a 500 billion implementation in Texas. Um, the water consumption is deeply concerning, and so I guess the gamble, to use a kind of frivolous term, is that these systems, the AI, and whether it's large language models or machine learning systems of all kinds, are going to help us solve big problems, and
Yes.
that benefit's going to outweigh the short term of energy usage. But the other thing is there's a lot of people working on the efficiency of these models. So one of the things that happened a couple of weeks ago, DeepSeek was a model that was released out of China. One of the things that was a massive part of that was the amount of energy that was used to train that was minuscule compared to OpenAI models, Amazon models, Anthropic models. So there's a lot of other interesting things about DeepSeek, but that was one of the things. And so as a side project, I am now installing a large language model in my Volkswagen multivan, so it can run on a computer that's offline, no access to the internet. So the DeepSeek model you can download and run on your computer. I'll plug it into the supplementary battery behind the driver's seat. And so theoretically, when the apocalypse comes, I can learn how to fish and ward off zombies and negotiate with, the new kinds of distorted humans that roam the earth. But as a kind of a provocation or a project, I'm kind of going, if I can channel enough energy and there's enough utility in a computer that's attached to solar panels, and that's all you need, that's a big step forward. I mean, it's not a useful consumer implementation. I just think it's funny. Um, but it's that's happened very quickly. Like to have open source models that you can download and run on your local computer. So all the inference, there's no water cooling data center stuff.
Mm.
That was used in the training of the model, but the actual running of it can be offline and local is a big step forward.
Yes. And I guess because you went to your this terminology of the singularity gets mentioned all the time.
Yeah.
Would you mind explaining to our potentially uneducated audience what on earth is it? And if it was to be true that the singularity will exist, is it possible for it to be positive for humankind?
Well, to be honest, I am not the best person to explain the singularity, but what I imagine of it is a coming together of like machine and human consciousness. Um, it's so there's a step before that which people talk about, which is general AGI, general AI, and that is something that kind of go, okay, can an AI um, generalize its capabilities over any task? At the moment, large language models and other machine learning models are good at some things and terrible at other things. Like most large language models can't count the amount of R's there are in the words raspberry or strawberry. They get it wrong. They can write an essay on, a PhD style essay on the history of, Roman culture, but they can't count the number of R's in a word. So this notion of AGI, general intelligence, is happening a little bit more quickly than most people thought. And Sam Altman, the CEO of OpenAI, is saying we're going to see it in the next couple of years. I personally thought when I started working in this space, it was like 2050. It's not. It's sooner than that.
Wow.
What that leads to is the kind of no one thinks AI is as smart as a human at the moment. It's more effective in certain tasks, and like I say, just terrible at other things. But what that leads to is like a consciousness, or it's not consciousness. We'll come back to consciousness. It's a representation of intelligence. There's a very high standard, and they
Mm.
talk about it like there's high school, then PhD, and AGI is like transforming, representing a whole organization's abilities because it can do everything. Um, I feel like the singularity, and again, I'm not super au fait with this because I kind of try and stay in practical things. But there are some incredible resources to go and watch and listen to about this online, is emerging between those capabilities. So that might become in the form of, a chip in your head, or it might come, in small ways between, just the coming together of human and machine in a biological sense. But people talk about consciousness, and it's an unsolved debate about whether machines can have. We started off thinking, can machines be intelligent? Yes, probably. I think we agree that they can be some. Can they be creative? We used to say that creativity was like a human thing that machines will never get there. And I think most tests go, oh, actually, by any other standard, they are being creative.
Yes,
Um,
Move
and
37
then,
example,
yeah,
right?
yeah, move to 7. But then, can they have consciousness? Can they experience the world the same as us? Obviously, we're not there yet, but some people think we might get there. One of the things about thinking about that issue is machines AI can kind of describe something because it's read about it, but it's never touched a hot plate, or it's never had its heart broken, or it's never fallen off a bike and scraped its knee. So it hasn't experienced those things. It's just read about it. So it's like saying, like asking someone, what's it like to fall out of love, and they'll go, oh, well, I've read about that, so here it is, and you go, well, that's not a true representation of that. That's just something you read in a book.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
the
Yeah,
singularity is probably outside our lifetime, but I also think it's a continuum. There's going to be a lot of things that happen over the next 50 years that kind of go, this is not the human machine relationship that I thought we were going to go towards. And the interface between that's going to be super interesting.
yeah. Oh, look, the interface between human, particularly with the brain Neuralink, for example,
Mm,
past projects. And I was listening to an interview with a neuroscientist expert, and they were talking about the reality of how our brain works is it is a use it or lose it scenario.
hmm
And that there was some research done with some young children that had been exposed for different reasons to a lot of virtual reality tools. And the virtual reality tools were actually shrinking the right-hand side of their brain's connections.
Yeah,
And the thesis is that when I was young, me and my brothers and sisters would take a sheet into the backyard with boxes and
yeah,
we would create all sorts of scenes and trains and trucks. And we had a game called Traffic and we had our bikes and everyone had different, there was the shopkeeper and the police officer and the petrol station. And,
amazing.
and we just created this world in our heads. It was also a physical world.
Yeah,
But we were creative, like we basically were acting in
you
these
had to make your own fun.
to make our own fun, right? Because we actually weren't very wealthy doing it, and what you could do with a rug and a box was just
Yeah,
you know, like, and what they were saying is that when the creativity is delivered to the children,
mm,
and it's amazing. Yes, their optic nerves and that side of their brain was going off, but their creative side wasn't. They were actually losing the ability.
yeah,
Now, thankfully, due to our plasticity, those children aren't going to be, permanently damaged or anything. So long as they're not using VR the whole time, they're going to be fine. And so that then extended to Neuralink and saying, well, what aspects of our brain will be deteriorated as a result of transferring that responsibility to a computer?
yeah.
And it's a
It's
very
actually it's really interesting. It's something I think about a lot for AI, sort of outside of Neuralink, sort of pre-Neuralink. and I think everybody is seeing this. If you use ChatGPT or other tools in a way that really shortcuts the task to be done, you definitely don't learn. You need to learn by doing. We kind of think about the teacher at high school kind of going, don't just show me the answer, show me how you got there, because they need to test that you understand the methodology. And now I'm seeing a lot of people and trying to. There's a lot of people doing research of this. The threat to critical thinking is real, because if people can kind of go in and prompt ChatGPT and sort of get it to generate something, and then they use that in an email or a PowerPoint or a research paper, whatever it is, they haven't learnt it. They haven't incrementally taken that on board and discovered something and had an aha moment or whatever. And if you ask them 2 weeks later what was in that PowerPoint, they're going to struggle to kind of, they might remember it, but not really feel it. And so I think about this continuum. You've got information, and then you've got like kind of knowledge, and then occasionally you can turn information into knowledge, which is very powerful.
Yep,
And
yep.
then even less occasionally, you can turn knowledge into wisdom.
Yeah,
And
100%.
that continuum is under threat from poor use of these tools. And it's also the thing, we get asked a lot about educating, working with education partners, or even just parents thinking about how their kids are going to use stuff. It's the tooling is a double-edged sword. If it's used to kind of shortcut the acquisition of knowledge, we've got some real challenges here, and
Uh,
that's what's happening in a lot of environments. So we've got to be really careful about that.
yeah, look, I feel very blessed that I got 3 degrees and did a bunch some doctoral level studies. And when I'm using ChatGPT, which I use every day, I
Yeah,
absolutely use it every day, and other AI tools on top of that. But I never ever, at the moment, certainly, I never ever just accept the output.
yeah,
And I think I'm getting pretty reasonable at my prompts and the conversations, and because I got the paid version, it remembers and all of that
yeah,
all sorts of benefits. But because I know how to design a workshop, for example, or a program, because I know how to do that, because I've had to do the pen and paper and storyboarding and do all of that sort of stuff,
yeah,
I can be critical of the output that it gives me. Now it's giving me output that's probably at 95% done. It really,
yeah.
but I still, from a practical point of view, I've just trained myself, do not accept just what it gives me. I must be critical of it. And there's always things that my experience is able to enhance. The benefit, of course, is the shortening of time, the compression of time,
Yeah.
which is the real gold for me.
Yeah, I think it's a good example. I think it's worth thinking about any way we use this, any task. What bit of the task are we delegating to AI, and what bit do I hold valuable that I need to come up with? And so sometimes, you know, if you write a very extensive, specific prompt with examples and lots of context, that's actually quite a useful way to think through an opportunity or a problem, because you have to write it down, you have to think through it. But I use these. I mean, I like you. I use these kind of tools every day, and I mainly, rather than have it generate some words for me that I'll use, I really do use them as like an AI thought partner for work. So I'm really interested in a muse, a coach, a mentor, a wingman. I'm not as interested in something that can write for me. And so, as an example, we got a request to kind of quote on a big AI project, and it was pretty fluffy brief, and I didn't really know how to tackle it. Um, but I wrote something and sort of asked Claude to, how would you approach this? Like, what kind of questions would you be asking the client in order to get them to provide you more information? And we kind of brainstormed about that, and then ended up sort of going back with a proposal, or creating a proposal. And the next day, I uploaded the brief and the proposal and said, I'm about to present this to the client. What do you think they might, given what they've asked for and given what I've come back with, what do you think the topics of conversation might be, and what should I think about? And that was a super useful process to kind of go, based on what you've written, what they've asked for, there's probably a bit of a gap here, and they're probably going to ask you about this. And they did. And I was prepared. And that was like 15 minutes before the meeting. I'd go, oh, that's a really good point. I better have an answer for that. And I do. I just hadn't put it in the document. So that kind of, if you think about, we're all the product of our own experience, lived lives, perspectives, and practice. Like, we just get better at practice. But that's a massive set of constraints, because I'm just like one, meat monster who's, 50 years old. I don't have everyone's global experience. Whereas a large language model has a depth and breadth of perspective and experience. You've just got to tap into it and find the weird edges for it. And by prompting like quite rich contextual specific prompts. You can get away from the banal and boring into the very specific areas of its knowledge.
Oh, 100%. I mean, I've had some tricky situations where I've actually uploaded the entire conversation from emails, notes from telephone conversations, and text messages for context, and
Yeah,
said, "Here's this scenario now. What do you think the best thing what
fantastic.
the best way that I should communicate?" And look, does that take time? Yes,
But
right.
it's worth it. I think it's a. I think if you just, I talk about context all the time. There's a term called literally a large language model's context window. So how many, it's tokenized, so that it converts words into tokens. But basically, how many words or tokens can it fit into its context window? And those things are getting really big. So Google's Gemini models are now kind of millions, and so you can fit a lot into the context window. So for example, with Gemini, it's a multimodal model. You can upload a video and say what's happening. So, cricket practice, what's happening with this player and what are they doing wrong with their quote? And that video might be like, 100 meg and go for 3 minutes, but it can process all of that. Yeah, I think it's and you sound like you're already on it, but we talk a lot about having an AI first mindset, which is just think of AI first and try something. Find the not everything works well. Some things work okay, and then you have to add more context. Some things just don't work well. I had an example a little while ago. My partner and I had an argument of sorts, and we come from very different backgrounds, so our perspectives are very different. My family's a small kind of white middle class suburban Mount Waverley kind of thing. Quite conservative, quite a quiet household. Hers is a large, volatile Italian family. And so our ways of kind of understanding family dynamics are very different just because of our backgrounds. And we had an argument. I'm kind of thinking, I don't even get what you're saying. So I'm typing into Claude going, here's the situation. Here's what's happened. Here's what she said. And here's what I said. What's going on? And Claude's like, what you might have failed to see is bang, 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 bang. And it's like, oh my God, this is cheaper than therapy. This is fantastic.
That's just go.
And it's just about context. Like the large language models have seen all sorts of, counseling notes or whatever. Like it's all in there.
And swinging back to move 37 from the large
Mm,
language models to accessing the data of an organization to have bespoke solutions.
mm,
I mean, we've spent a fair bit of time talking really about the large language models and what they
yeah,
do, but bringing it back to what you're doing through move 37 and the diamonds, not just gold, but the diamonds that must be sitting within the marriage between the large language model and what's going on with the data in an organization. And you
it's
use
incredible.
salesperson and customer service example at the moment. Have you got another example that folk might
Yeah, I
heads?
think it's interesting. I think you're dead on that, and the reality is that the bigger the organization, the more data they have, and the more complex it is, and the more disparate and locked up in weird and wonderful places. And it's funny, there's some kind of human factors at play here that the people who've worked in big companies don't necessarily want to give up their data to a new AI project. They kind of go, "Oh, that's my role. I'm the owner of that," which we encounter sometimes. Um, but I think that unlocking of insights. So the T in GPT, so generative pre-trained transformer models, a large language model's ability to transform a data or translate or summarize or turn it into something else is profound. So here's another example. Work in an organization who has lots of customer data. So, when did you last visit the website? What's a comment they've left in a CRM about, customer service thing or whatever? What's their last purchases? All sorts of little things, but they're all sitting separately. And no one has a good view of that. So bizarrely, a large language model is very good at taking one customer's data points from all these different systems and making sense of it. And so we talk about rather than, how organizations have like personas or segments, they're normally kind of top down. Roy Morgan has Helix personas. I think there's like 76, and they basically try to describe every Australian into a box. It's not, I don't find it that scientific because it's a lot of subjectivity that goes into building those. But what we're starting to see is the ability to build bottom up personas. So we don't need to say, here's the box and here's what it's called. Now let's find who sits in it. we can actually just observe the data, and the LLM helps us create these synthetic personas and describes them. So the power of distributing that to the business and kind of going, we've now got 116,000 people in a segment we're calling shaky customer. And the LLM came up with the name. Here's the description of them, which the LLM generated. But here's, if you want to look at the customer records specifically and make it explorable and explainable, that's also available. So, this domain used to be just for people who could run great database queries or machine learning people or data engineers. So again, that kind of ability for everyone in the organization to have access to this stuff. Because if you work in product or customer sales or the CEO or CFO, you need that stuff. I mean, you're going to do your job better if you have access to that kind of material. Um, and often we're seeing this a bit, that you just need to wait your turn to get, a project up or get some time with a data engineer, and it's not feasible. Like there's too many things to do. So different departments just don't get access to that stuff. So I think creating narrative out of data I find fascinating. And so this is a combination of traditional machine learning models and generative AI doing something quite new.
So with shaky people, right?
Yeah.
Let's say Gary's in the shaky people
Yeah.
group. I'm assuming the sophistication would be, hey, when you reach out to Gary, who's in this shaky people category,
Yeah.
this is how you need to communicate with him.
Absolutely. So
That's
the prototype we're working on at the moment says, these people are super price sensitive. Another segment isn't. You could bump up the price by $10. So imagine like a telco, which is not the thing we're working on, but we did a test with this telco data set. There's people who are really concerned about connectivity and hate it when their phone drops out, but actually aren't that price sensitive. You could charge them another $10 and say, you get extra customer support but whatever. There's other people that are super price sensitive and um, don't want to be messed with on that front, but because they're on a cheaper plan or whatever, they don't really they don't have the best customer service or the best service in general. And then there's a bunch of people who really respond well to referrals, and these are all sets of behaviours that are quite they overlap, but they're kind of able to be put people in these segments. And so, yeah, the next step is what kind of campaign. So this is more about campaigns than kind of one-to-one reach outs. What is a campaign strategy and examples of executions that you would do for that one? It's very powerful. And we don't propose kind of saying just create the campaign and send it. These are leaping in deep into a marketing team's kind of workflow and saying, or a customer service team going, this is a great thought starter, and this is why the system thinks this is a good thing. And by the way, there was 116 people in this segment 2 weeks ago. Now there's 263. So this has become people are like drifting in and out because of their behavior. So someone goes on and buys something on the website or has a positive thing to say on social media or in the CRM, they might drift out of that segment automatically.
okay. So it's fluid.
Yeah.
Yeah. Which probably not how most customer segmentation is occurring in organizations.
No,
Not,
not. It's not fluid. What's the opposite of fluid? Static or,
yeah,
solid.
like a concrete, man.
Yeah.
You know,
Built up.
so the other thing that emerged for me while you were just saying this is that most of the large institutional organizations, I'm talking the billion-dollar plus, which could even be government levels, right? Left hand and right hand do not talk to each other.
Yeah, I think we know that from lots of, yeah.
Yeah. Whereas what you're talking about is these large language models and the bespoke work that you can do through Move 37 can get the left and the right hand talking with each other. Potentially, even if the humans don't want that to happen, if you get access to the data, you can get them talking, which is actually going to create the sort of outcomes for customers, community members, stakeholders, whoever it is that you're ultimately serving. And that's what it's really all about, right? It's about being more efficient along the way for everybody.
Yeah, I wouldn't overplay what I said before about like, people don't want to give up the data. That's occasional a thing, but that's like a kind of a personality trait or an individual thing. In general, organizations want things to work better. So it actually has been somewhat of a surprising, I guess, capability. And what we've been working on a lot is exactly what you said. All of this stuff is locked up in Salesforce or in Zendesk or in, whatever system. in that example I said before about the salespeople, they could go in and log into that. But they have to remember 12 logins and they have to, have the motivation to do it. And, they're busy and the CEO wants to get them back on the road, kind of making new appointments and selling. Um, and so what's been interesting about this capability is there's a fuzzy interface that sits over the top, and it's the interface of your choice. It could be a chat interface, or it could be a search interface, or it could be buttons in a application. And then the AI is able to go now, and this is quite emergent, able to go in and log in and reason over the task and understand which systems to log into to deliver on that. These kind of projects used to be called digital transformation jobs, and banks and telcos and major supermarkets would work on them for 20 years. They'd cost billions of dollars and never get finished. It's a very interesting capability for AI to be able to reason over a human's query, understand what to do with it. And you can't rely on a large language model to do this. You have to build in tooling. So, log into the database and do a query. It's not really an LLM thing, but the LLM understood when it needed to direct the tool to do that. And so these agents, these AI agents, are able to go and do that, collect the outputs, the summaries, the numbers, whatever it is, and come back. And then the LLM might make sense of it and present it back to the user. It's incredible. A good analogy of this, I was playing with an AI hedge fund, which is just a demo. And basically, you put in NVIDIA or Microsoft or Apple or whatever stock you want to ascertain whether you should buy, hold, or sell. And then you pick the series of agents. So thing about AI agents is they're going to be tasked with more niche things. So large language models are general in capability. AI agents in this AI hedge fund, one of them is really good at sentiment analysis. One of them is good at technology analysis. One of them is good at evaluation analysis. And so all the agents go away and look at different data and come back. And then the portfolio manager, LLM, goes, on what I've heard from all of my minions, I'm recommending buy, sell, or hold. It's a really nice analogy to think all these series of experts who are good at different things, in this instance agents, and then a large language model can generalize over that and go, okay, great. I couldn't have done that by myself. Here's my responsible decision or recommendation.
And Dave, a year ago, you said to me, looking forward, that you believed human and AI will beat AI on its own or human on its own. Sounds like that's still true.
It's still true. I think I'm now seeing a picture, like if you divide up people from, say, a job role into a series of tasks, it's now become apparent that if we can have reasoning models, so we've seen these reasoning models come out the last 6 months, which are different to GPT models. So these reasoning models are able to kind of just go, not just I'm just going to come up with an answer straight away. They're going to take a multi-step or to a chain of thought approach. And theoretically, that's more effective at loading all of that stuff into the context window. It's like saying it out loud and remembering it. But taking a step before you come up with an answer, going through a bunch of series of steps. And so you used to be able to do roughly that with prompting, but now the models are doing that out of the box. So now the human and the machine working together is much more effective than a human or machine. But within the human tasks, you are going to delegate super specific things and not have to worry about it because the reasoning over when to delegate that is getting better.
Okay, that's great.
Yeah.
And
so I have a more nuanced view of that, but it's still true,
yeah, absolutely. And
Yeah.
that's going to continue to happen, right? Because it's
Yeah.
an evolving space, and you've been in it for decades now, and saw what has happened in the past couple of years. That some of it, some people didn't even know really AI was really actually being operated and used. And as you know, it's been actually working along for decades, even well before the internet became what it is known as today. Or if I recall correctly, going back to the 50s, 1950s. So
Yeah, totally.
yeah.
I think another thing is to remind ourselves is ChatGPT, which kind of blew this whole world up in the sense of it's a magical, quick, astonishing interface. OpenAI, who created that, their board didn't know they were going to release that. That was an experiment. So you know how the OpenAI board kind of blew up last year and Sam Altman got fired and then they reconfigured the board. It came out now. It was an Australian researcher who was on the board said we didn't even know they were going to release ChatGPT, which is extraordinary. They didn't. The reason it's extraordinary is not necessarily because if I was the board, I'd be kind of miffed about that. But it's more like they didn't think it was going to have the profound effect it was. They didn't think it was big news. They thought it was just an experiment, but it wasn't.
No, no.
So
Well,
some of these things are not predictable.
no. Well, Elon's version is coming out in the next couple of weeks. I heard him say earlier.
No, it's out. Yeah. So it came out, Grok 3 came
Grok.
out yesterday. Yeah.
Oh, there you go. Perfect timing. Grok 3 was
Yeah.
um so let's see where that goes. It'd be interesting to see if that's got anywhere near the response as DeepSeek. And having heard some of the DeepSeek story about how DeepSeek just went prompting ChatGPT to get its data
Yeah. Well,
is
that's
interesting. It's an
it's
interesting.
yeah, DeepSeek's interesting because the way they put it together wasn't from scratch, wasn't from ground up. They got lots of different components that had already been developed, and this is back to the energy discussion, the energy consumption discussion. That's a legitimate way to build something. It's to build things from other things that exist. I do think that it's kind of ironic Sam Altman sort of complaining about scraping data, given that's exactly the basis of how their value and the whole company has emerged. They've settled lawsuits with the New York Times and all sorts of other people because they've been scraping data for years. But that's a legitimate way to build stuff based on previous work, which gives me hope on the say the energy consumption point of view, because the more previous work that's done, the more efficient it is going to be at making the next thing because you're not starting from scratch.
Well, aren't we all standing on the shoulders of the giants before us? I mean, it's the same thing.
Yeah,
So,
yeah.
and of course, what that's going to do though is create the exponential. I mean, the exponential curve is potentially so steep we can't get our heads around it.
I think so. I think it's very hard to grasp. There's a thing called Moore's law, and that kind of technology law doesn't apply to AI. And I think about when I was in grade 6, we did orienteering at school. So you get a compass and a map, and you got to find something that might be like a kilometre away in the bush. And it's funny, you get it if it's 100 meters away and you're 1 degree off, it doesn't matter. You can just see the thing. If you're 1 degree off after like a kilometer, you're screwed. You're not going to have lateral vision of where you're going. And so I think about every single AI breakthrough is heading off in these random directions that are unpredictable. And that breakthrough begets more breakthroughs, which kind of like a tree diagram explodes. That's why it's super hard to kind of go between now and the end of the year. We don't exactly know where we're going to be because every breakthrough creates more.
Yes,
So the example of DeepSeek which is so interesting for people who have been kind of watching this space, is it's a GPT-4 level open source model and the first of its kind. How it came about and came out of China and all that kind of stuff is interesting. But the fact that we've now got a model that these companies spent billions of dollars training GPT-4 and Gemini and those kind of things, and we've got one that we can just download and put in our van on a computer is extraordinary.
100% it is. And
Yeah.
where it's all, I mean, look, I think we've just got to become, I mean, the purpose of this interview is just to contribute to raising people's awareness, ideally trying to not make people afraid of it and to be curious with it, because that's certainly been my attitude towards it all. It's just to be curious, look at where the opportunities are. I think where you said earlier about where can you augment operations from your business so that there's still a degree of control of the human at the moment. So that's where we're getting that human
Yeah.
and AI interface happening. Certainly, there's opportunity, as you've said, for large organisations to reach out to Move 37 to really have a deep dive with you about how you can actually help create that interface between the large language model and their data and
Yep.
get these bespoke solutions happening. I equally think that there's a massive opportunity for small to medium-sized businesses because of their ability to be nimble to actually adopt playing in this space from a problem-solving solution. Because I think for in some instances, the large institutions' decision-making processes, Dave, are going to be too slow.
Yep.
And possibly we're in this window of time. How long it's open for, I don't know. But possibly we're in this window of time where small to medium-sized businesses could actually come up with solutions for large institutional enterprises that they just are too slow to solve themselves and potentially even take significant market share from them. If the small to medium-sized businesses have the deep seek mindset to some degree of saying, well, how can I leverage what already exists out there? How can I stand
Yep.
shoulders of that, utilize it in my space. Now, you did start at share at the outset your three services that you've got that you're providing with folk at the moment. You've got the masterclasses, your activity workflow, and of course that bespoke build. Do you want to just explain a little bit more about the masterclass? Because I suspect that might be more for small to medium-sized businesses.
Yeah, I think that you did write about the small to medium opportunity. We use the phrase punch above their weight a lot, and it's about exactly what you said, catching up to bigger organizations who are slow to move, decision making isn't that efficient, have a fixed cost base. It's very hard for a large organization to reduce its cost base, and there's obviously reasons for that from a headcount point of view, look after your people. But in general, your ability to pivot and maneuver and take advantage of new technologies is not as great, even though you've got the resource and the capital potentially. But to make holistic change is much harder, obviously. The small to medium enterprise needs to have this balance of being introspective enough to being able to look at the way you do things and describe things. So, what the masterclass is, or the series of masterclasses, is the first thing is, inspire and educate and sort of talk people through it. What's happening in generative AI, what difference is it making, maybe some examples of your industry. The second bit is one of my favorite bits, and it's really empathizing with the people in the room to kind of go, tell me about your day. Like, what are the tasks you do? And we plot them on like a high impact, low impact, low complexity, high complexity. And you go, if you're doing something high complexity and low impact, just stop doing it. Like, there's no value. And so people really lean into that task. And this has nothing to do with AI. It's just about understanding what's going on in your organization, how you work as an individual, as a team, as a company. And that's a very useful way as a stepping stone between what the technology might be able to do, but actually applying it to your context. So you think about, like, there's a lot of differences between companies. There's a lot of similarities. So for example, companies have lots of documents, benefit from a lot of, this generative AI stuff that can do natural language understanding, natural language processing. But things like time management, information overload, the need to create more proposals, the need to create more new business are pretty common kind of problems, but nuanced ways of implementing that. Affecting your company. And so that middle bit is, okay, help us understand. And then we go away and go, given what we've heard, here are some things you can try straight away. And so this is before we get to any kind of sense of workflow automation. It's just to help people understand that the more you put into, individual productivity AI tools, and you describe it with the kind of specificity you were talking about before, the more likely you'll be able to go, actually, this is something I can do every day. I can service more clients, do better customer service, assess my email, whatever the challenge is, just by refining this prompt or this set of actions and getting better at it. So these are kind of, productivity unlocks. And it's the first thing is just understanding your day. And I find that really interesting. And I feel privileged to be able to go into organizations and find out people's days, because it's kind of ethnographic research. It's a light touch ethnographic research and a lot of design thinking stuff, which I've done before, just to empathize with them and to try to unpack and ask questions for clarification rather than, leap to what AI can do. But you see people kind of go, because they've used ChatGPT or whatever, go, as soon as they're talking about it, they go, oh, yeah, that's interesting. I hadn't really thought about trying something like this. And so the session after, we formalize that a bit and go, okay, here's some things you're going to try. And we're going to teach you how to prompt better and that kind of stuff. But they're kind of doing it. And so they're bringing their own pain points from the previous session into the next one. And it's a very satisfying process to see people's kind of eyes light up and go, I'm actually empowered to help fix this myself.
Oh, that's just brilliant. I love it. And just, understanding your day. It's interesting with the business coaching I do. It's one of the
Yeah,
tasks. But
similar.
I don't have time for all this stuff. Let's analyze your day.
Yeah.
And it's eye-opening because people, when we ask them, do you know how many hours there are in a week? 24, and they eventually, we work out it's 168. And it's like, okay, what are you doing with the 168 hours?
Yeah.
And we work back from there. What's going to be the best way for people to reach out to you, Dave, if they want to actually get into one
Jump
of
on the
those?
move37.ai, our website, move37.ai, and have a look around there. And, there's a contact button, so reach out to us through there, or find me on LinkedIn.
That's move, MOVE 37 for 37
Yep,
dot AI, correct?
that's right. Yeah.
You're also active on LinkedIn as well. We can catch you there. Dave, I really want to thank you for your time. I think we're going to have a date next February as well. You cool with that?
Yeah, great. Every year.
Let's do it. Let's do it. Folks, we've been absolutely delighted. So, is there any final message you'd like to leave with folks before we wrap up today, Dave?
No, I think this has been a great chat. I've really enjoyed it. We've covered a lot of ground, and I think you've kind of pulled out the interesting points of what's happening. And I think I'll just encourage people to jump in, experiment, play, understand, because it's very hard to understand from outside in. It's not one of those things you can just observe or read about. Jump in and have a play, and just try things out, and it's super satisfying.
Yeah, play, be a kid, be curious.
Yeah,
Like word in the sandpit, right? It's exactly.
absolutely.
God, I remember the 80s and 90s, we used to talk about the work sand, the sand pit, we had the sand,
Yeah,
right? But it's the same now, it's the opposite
yeah.
sort of thing.
Gary, as I always like to say, it's amazing what you can do with a box and a rug in the backyard.
Oh, great listening, Dave. Right. Folks, reach out to Move 37. Dave King, CEO and founder, great organization, doing amazing things right at the front end, pointy end here across APAC, Australia, New Zealand, and the Australian Asian Pacific region. And folks, thanks again for joining us on the Moving Beyond Being Good podcast. I'm Gary Ryan, your host from Organizations That Matter. We love bringing you content as we do all the time with great guests like Dave. Make sure you like and subscribe. Whack a comment. What was the one takeaway for you from this interview with Dave? I'd like us to get at least 100 comments on this episode. Let's go.